The day my roommate introduced me to her parents as her fiancé, we had lived together for 14 months and had never once touched on purpose. Not a hug, not a hand on a shoulder, nothing. So when her mother pulled me into the kitchen, gripped both my hands like she was checking they were real, and whispered, "Thank you for saying yes to her," I had exactly 2 seconds to decide whether I was going to ruin the most important weekend of June Maddox's life or learn how to lie convincingly enough to save it. I chose the lie. What I didn't know yet was that the lie would teach me the truth about the woman I'd been quietly in love with for a year without admitting it to a single living person, including myself. My name is Wes Holloway. I'm 33. I fix boats for a living in a small harbor town in Maine, the kind of place where the fog rolls in so thick by October that the lighthouse sounds more useful than it looks. I'm not a dramatic person. I measure things twice. I keep a spare of everything. People describe me as steady, the way you'd describe a porch step, useful, dependable, easy to overlook until it's gone. I'd been renting out the second bedroom of my apartment above the hardware store for almost 2 years, mostly because the harbor doesn't pay enough to be sentimental about empty rooms. The first tenant was a retired ferry captain who left because I talked too little. The second was June. She answered my ad on a Tuesday. She showed up in a paint-splattered jacket, holding a box of mismatched mugs and a fern that was visibly dying, and she looked around the apartment for about 4 seconds before saying, "The light in here is honest. I'll take it." I had no idea what that meant. I still rented to her anyway. June was a illustrator who did covers for small presses and murals for businesses that couldn't afford murals. She was 31, sharp in a way that snuck up on you, with dark curls she was always losing pens in, and a habit of narrating her own bad decisions out loud while she made them. She woke up late, worked until 2 in the morning, drank tea so strong it could strip varnish, and left her brushes soaking in coffee cups until I learned to check before I poured. We were not a romance. Let me be clear about that, because it matters for the rest of this. We were 2 people who had built a quiet, careful friendship out of shared rent and a refusal to be a burden to each other. We had rules. We split groceries down the middle. We knocked. We never asked the other one to choose us over plans. I think we both liked it that way because it asked nothing of us, and both of us had spent our lives being asked for too much. What I won't pretend is that I never noticed her. I noticed her the way you notice weather without choosing to. The way she hummed off key when a drawing was finally going right. The way she'd appear in my doorway at midnight with 2 mugs and say, "I'm not interrupting, I'm delivering," and sit on the floor and tell me about whatever was breaking her heart that week. The way she remembered, without being told, that I take my coffee black and my bad news straight. I told myself it was just proximity. You live close enough to someone and your chest starts confusing comfort for something bigger. That was the story I committed to. Then her parents called. I was on the couch sanding a rudder fitting on a towel across my knees, because the harbor doesn't believe in weekends, and neither do I. June came out of her room holding her phone away from her face like it might bite, her eyes huge. "Okay," she said. "Don't panic." "I'm not panicking. You're panicking. My parents are coming Friday." "That's nice." "It's not nice, Wes. It's a catastrophe with luggage." She dropped onto the other end of the couch and put her face in her hands. "My mom's been worried about me for 2 years. The career, the money, the living situation. She thinks she used the word adrift. And last Christmas, when she wouldn't stop, I told her something to make her stop." I set the rudder fitting down. "What did you tell her?" June looked at me through her fingers. I told her I was engaged. The apartment got very quiet. Outside, a gull was arguing with another gull. "To who?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just slowly lowered her hands and looked at me with an expression that was half apology and half plea, and I felt the floor of the conversation tilt under me like the deck of a boat. "June, to who?" "I never said a name," she said quickly. "I swear. I just said I'd met someone steady and good and that I was happy. I thought she'd forget." People say things to their mothers. But she didn't forget. She's been glowing about it for 6 months, and now they're driving up to meet him. She covered her mouth. "To meet you, because you're the only steady, good person in this apartment, and she's seen your name on the lease, and oh God, Wes, I've made it so much worse in my head this whole drive. She'll be..." Breathe, I said. She breathed. I should have said no. That was the sensible answer, the porch step answer. June, we'll tell them the truth. They love you, it'll be embarrassing for an hour, and fine forever after. That's what a steady man says. But I looked at her sitting there, this person who narrated her own disasters out loud so she wouldn't have to face them alone. And for once, she had no narration left. She just looked scared and small and entirely out of words. And something in me that I'd been ignoring for 14 months stood up before the rest of me could vote. What's his name? I asked. The fiancé. What did you tell them? She blinked. I didn't. Wes, no. I'm not asking you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. I picked the rudder fitting back up so my hands would stop noticing they wanted to do something with themselves. One weekend. We get the story straight, we get through it, they drive home happy, and then in a couple months you reconsider the relationship over the phone where nobody can see your face. Clean exit. June stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You'd do that. I'd do that. Why? And there it was. The real question. The one with teeth. I gave her the safe half of the answer. Because you've never once made me feel like a burden, I said, and I'd like to return the favor. She didn't cry. June almost never cried. But her eyes did that bright, glassy thing, and she nodded once, hard, like she was accepting a deal she didn't deserve, and she said, his name is Wes. I couldn't even lie about that part. I tried to think of a fake name driving home, and every single one of them was just yours. I didn't know what to do with that sentence. So I did what I always do. I changed the subject to logistics. We spent the next 2 days building a relationship out of nothing, which, it turns out, is harder than building a boat. We sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down a history. How we met True, the ad, the dying fern. When it changed, we invented a night during last winter's blackout. Candles, her telling me about her grandmother, both of us realizing. The proposal, we agreed it was small and private, no ring yet because we wanted to choose it together, which conveniently explained the bare hand her mother would absolutely check. What unsettled me wasn't the lying. It was how little we had to invent. Favorite thing about me, June said. Pen ready. Quick, your mom will ask. You leave honesty everywhere, I said. On purpose and by accident. You can't help telling the truth, even when it costs you. You told your own mother you were engaged rather than let her worry, which is a lie wrapped around a kindness, which is the most you thing I've ever heard. June stopped writing. That's, she started. Too much? I'll soften it. No, she said. That's the realest thing anyone's said about me in a long time. She set the pen down and looked at me for a beat too long, then picked it back up like she'd caught herself. Okay, hard ones. What's our song? We don't have a song. Everyone has a song, Wes. My mom will ask, and if we both say we don't have one, it sounds like we haven't thought about a single thing past the next month. I thought about it. That thing you hum when a drawing's going right, the off-key one? She narrowed her eyes. I do not hum. You hum constantly. It's somewhere between a sea shanty and a smoke alarm. You've been listening to me hum for 14 months. It's the apartment's worst feature, and I've gotten weirdly fond of it. I said it lightly, the way you say something true when you've dressed it up as a joke so you can take it back if you need to. June didn't laugh. She wrote something down on the legal pad and angled it away from me, and I let her. Fight, she said. We need one fight on record. Couples who've never fought are suspicious. We fight about the brushes in the coffee cups. That's not a fight. That's me ruining your mugs and you suffering in silence. That's the most realistic fight we have. She laughed then, finally, the real one that came up out of her chest. Fine. We fight about the brushes. You're long-suffering. I'm unrepentant. My mother will believe that immediately. She looked down at the page. What do I say about you? When she asks me. I shrugged, suddenly very interested in the wood grain of the table. Say something about reliability. That's not what I'd say. It's what's true. It's not the whole thing that's true. She set the pen down. I'd say you listen like it's a skill you trained for. I'd say you never make me feel like I'm too much. And I have been told my whole life that I'm too much. I'd say you fixed the leak under my window without telling me because you didn't want me to feel like I owed you anything. And I only know because I found the dried-out caulk tube in the recycling. I looked up. We held it there. That look, longer than two roommates should. We should practice the story, I said, because I am a coward. Right, she said, the story. Her parents arrived Friday in a station wagon with a kayak strapped to the roof that I would learn had never once touched water. Her mother, Carol, was warmth with a clipboard. She hugged me before I got my name out, then held my hands and inspected me like a jeweler. Her father, Ray, shook my hand exactly twice and said, "Boats, huh?" in a tone that suggested he'd been hoping for an accountant but could be talked into a boat guy. The first hour was the kitchen, and the kitchen was where Carol pulled me aside and whispered, "Thank you for saying yes to her. She's so much herself with you. I haven't seen her this steady in years." Steady. The word that had followed me my whole life, now aimed at June, and somehow it stung in a completely new direction. Because the truth was June had been steadier these last months, and so had I. And neither of us had ever named the reason. "She's the steady one," I heard myself say. "She just hides it under all that color." Carol's eyes filled. June, across the room pretending to look for wine glasses, went very still. And I knew she'd heard me. And I knew I hadn't said it for Carol at all. Dinner was where the real test started, because dinner is where families ask the questions that have hooks in them. Carol started gently. How long had we known we wanted to live together? Whether the harbor was lonely in winter, whether June was eating enough, which is a question every mother asks regardless of evidence. June handled those. She was good in front of people. She narrated her way through anything. I watched her relax a little, and I made the mistake of relaxing too. Then Ray put his spoon down. "So when's the wedding?" he asked, halfway through the chowder. "We're not rushing it," June said. "Rushing it." Ray repeated it like the words tasted strange. "You've been engaged 6 months. You've lived together over a year. What's left to not rush?" "We want to do it right," I said. "Right costs money," Ray said, not unkindly. "Boats and murals don't exactly print it. I'm just asking because I'd like to know my daughter's going to be all right. That's a father's whole job. You'll understand someday." The table went a little tight. June's smile stayed put, but her knuckles went white around her spoon. And I understood, suddenly and completely, that this was the thing. This was the adrift, the worry, the 2 years of a mother glowing and a father waiting for the other shoe. June hadn't invented an engagement to brag. She'd invented it to buy herself one Christmas where her family looked at her and saw someone who was going to be all right. "Ray," I said, and something in my voice made him look up. "She's going to be more than all right. You want to know what I see when I look at your daughter? I see someone who could have taken any safe road and chose the one that lets her make things that didn't exist before she made them. That's not a drift. That takes more steadiness than any job with a desk. I should know. I've got the desk equivalent. She's braver than me on her worst day." Ray studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow, and picked his spoon back up, and the tightness in the room let go. "How'd he propose?" Carol asked, leaning in, eager to move past her husband's interrogation. And June, who had memorized our invented blackout story word for word, opened her mouth and froze. I watched the whole thing happen. The panic, the blank, the look she shot me that said, "I lost it. The words are gone." So I reached over and put my hand on hers. It was the first time we'd ever touched on purpose. I felt it go up my arm like cold water. Her fingers were paint-stained and warm, and they startled under mine, and then slowly turned and laced through. And I told the story we'd written, except I didn't tell the written one. I told a truer one. "It wasn't a proposal," I said. "Not really. It was a night when the power was out, and we were sitting on the floor with candles, and she was telling me about her grandmother's garden, the way she always describes things like she's painting them in the air. And I realized I'd been waiting for her to come stand in my doorway with 2 mugs every single night, and that if she ever stopped, the apartment would just be rooms, so I didn't get down on one knee. I just asked her if she'd let me keep her around for good, and she said, I looked at June. "What did you say?" June's eyes were wet, and her hand was tight in mine, and she said, in a voice I'd never heard her use, "I said I'd been waiting for you to figure that out." The table sighed. Carol pressed a napkin to her eyes. Ray cleared his throat and said, "Boats, huh?" Again, but warmer this time, like a man surrendering. And under the table, neither of us let go. It got harder after dinner, not easier, because the parents went to the guest room. June gave up her bed, and we'd planned to share my room for appearances. With me, on a sleeping bag on the floor, and then it was just the two of us in a room with one bed and a story we'd told too well. June sat on the edge of the mattress. I unrolled the sleeping bag with the focus of a man defusing a bomb. "You changed the story," she said quietly. "I forgot the written one." "No, you didn't. She watched me. You remember everything. You changed it on purpose." I didn't answer. I was very busy with a zipper. "Wes." She said my name the way she'd said it at dinner, and I had to stop pretending the zipper was hard. "The thing you said, about me coming to your doorway every night. About the apartment just being rooms." She swallowed. "Was that the script, or was that you?" There are moments where the safe answer and the true answer split apart, and you have to pick a road. I'd spent 33 years picking safe. Measure twice. Keep a spare. Don't ask anyone to choose you, because then they might not. I sat down on the floor with my back against the bed, close to her knees, and I looked at the dark window instead of at her, because some truths can only be told sideways. 14 months ago, you brought a dying fern into my apartment and told me the light was honest, I said. I've been quietly falling for you ever since. And I told myself it was just because you live close. I told myself it was proximity. I built a whole story so I wouldn't have to look at it. I exhaled. I changed the proposal because for 1 minute, I wanted to know what it felt like to say the true version out loud. That was selfish. "I'm sorry." The room was silent. I could hear the harbor. I could hear my own heart doing something undignified. Then June slid off the bed and sat down on the floor next to me, shoulder against my shoulder, the way she sat on my floor at midnight 100 times before, except everything was different now. "You want to know why every fake name I tried in the car turned into yours?" she said. I assumed it was convenience. It wasn't convenience. She turned her head, and now we were too close. The kind of too close we'd spent 14 months never being. "It's because I've been doing the exact same thing you have. Telling myself it was rent. Telling myself I came to your doorway because I was lonely and you happened to be there. But Wes, you're never just there. You're the reason I stopped working until 2 in the morning. You're the reason I started coming home." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I told my mother I was engaged because some stupid honest part of me already felt like I was halfway there and I didn't know how to say it to you." I looked at her, at the curls with no pen in them tonight, at the bright glassy eyes, at the mouth that couldn't help telling the truth even when it cost her. "We've never even held hands," I said, which was the most idiotic thing I could have said, except it wasn't, because her hand found mine in the dark for the second time that night. On purpose. With no audience to perform for. "We have now," she whispered. And then she kissed me. It wasn't a fake engagement kiss. It wasn't a kiss for parents or for a story. It was slow and certain and a little stunned, like both of us had been holding our breath for 14 months and finally remembered we were allowed to exhale. Her hand came up to my jaw. Mine found the small of her back. The sleeping bag, the script, the careful rules we'd built to ask nothing of each other. All of it just quietly dissolved. When we broke apart, she kept her forehead against mine, and she laughed once, soft and disbelieving. "This is a problem," she breathed. "Why?" "Because I lied to my parents, and now it's not a lie, and I don't know which part is the fake one anymore." "None of it," I said. "That's the problem. None of it was fake. We just put a deadline on the only true thing in the building." She pulled back enough to look at me. "So what do we do?" I should tell you I had a plan. I'm a man with a spare of everything, but I didn't have a spare for this. So I told her the truth a third time because I was finding it was the only thing that worked between us. "We stop performing," I said. "Tomorrow we don't tell your parents a bigger lie. We just stop pretending the real thing isn't real. We give it a chance to be true in daylight, where nobody's watching and nobody set us up." I brushed a curl out of her face. I don't want to be the guy you invented to make your mother stop worrying. I want to be the guy you actually choose on an ordinary Tuesday for no reason except that you want to." June Maddox, who narrated every bad decision out loud, said absolutely nothing. She just kissed me again, and I decided that was a yes I could build on. We didn't sleep much. Not like that. We talked on the floor until the window went gray, the way we always had, except now with her head on my chest and my hand in her hair, mapping the difference between the friendship we'd been and the thing we were becoming. She told me she'd been scared for a year, that if she ever said it out loud and I didn't feel the same, she'd lose the one safe place she had. I told her I'd been scared of the exact same thing, which is the stupidest and most human reason two people ever waste a year. "We're idiots," she said. "Steady idiots," I said. "We measure twice. We just never measured this." In the morning, things got complicated, because that's what mornings do. Carol caught us in the kitchen, me making coffee, June stealing it before it finished brewing, both of us laughing about it in a way that was suddenly real and visible. Carol stood in the doorway with her hand over her heart and said, "Oh, I knew it. I knew this was right. You two you don't perform it. You just are." And June looked at me, and I watched her decide something. I watched the honesty she couldn't help start to climb up her throat. "Mom," she said, "I have to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish." Carol's smile faltered. Ray looked up from his coffee. My stomach dropped, because I thought I knew where this was going, and I thought it might be the bravest and worst timed thing she'd ever done. "When I told you I was engaged last Christmas," June said, her voice shaking but steady underneath, the way the harbor is rough on top and deep underneath, "it wasn't true. I made it up because you were so worried about me, and I couldn't stand it. And Wes is my roommate, and he agreed to pretend this weekend so I wouldn't have to break your heart in person, and I let you both believe a lie, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The kitchen went silent. Carol's hand was still over her heart, but for a different reason now. I waited for it to fall apart. I braced for the porch step to crack. Then June reached over and took my hand the third time. And the first time she did it not as part of any story at all, and she said, "But here's the part that's confusing. Because somewhere in the middle of faking it, I stopped, and so did he. Last night we told each other the truth we'd been hiding for over a year. So when I say I'm marrying him, I don't mean the lie. I mean it's not a lie anymore. I just got the order backwards. I told you the ending before we'd lived the beginning." Her eyes filled. "I'm not adrift, Mom. I think I'm the steadiest I've ever been. I just had to lie my way into being brave enough to say it." Carol started crying. Ray put down his coffee, looked at me for a long moment, and said, "I swear to you, boats." Huh. But this time he stood up and shook my hand a third time, which from Ray Maddox was the same as a blessing carved in granite. "You told us the truth even when the lie would have been easier," he said gruffly. "That's the only thing I needed to know about whoever ended up with my daughter." We took it slowly after that, which sounds impossible given we'd announced a fake engagement to her parents, but it's true. We unwound the lie and let the real thing grow into the space it left behind. We told her parents there was no ring yet because that part had genuinely been true, and that we weren't rushing because we wanted the relationship to be older than the announcement. Carol called every Sunday. Ray sent me a tide chart in the mail with no note, which June assured me was the most affectionate thing he had ever done for anyone. June moved her brushes into the kitchen properly. I built her a drafting table out of white oak and set it under the window with the honest light, the one she'd noticed on the first day. She painted a mural on the long blank wall of our apartment. 2 mugs on a floor. Candlelight. A dying fern that, in the painting, was finally coming back to life. "It's not subtle," I said. "I'm not a subtle person," she said. "You knew that when you rented me the room." We had our actual first date 3 weeks after her parents left a real one. Dinner at the only place in town with cloth napkins. Both of us nervous like teenagers, even though we'd already kissed, already confessed, already lived together for over a year. She wore a dress, I wore a shirt, with no boat grease on it. Halfway through she laughed and said, "This is ridiculous. I've seen you brush your teeth 400 times. And I said, "Yeah, but I never got to take you anywhere." And she got quiet and reached across the table for my hand, and by then taking her hand had stopped being a surprise and started being home. A year later, I proposed for real. Not in front of anyone. Not with a story we'd rehearsed. Just on the floor of the apartment at midnight, 2 mugs between us, the mural glowing in the lamplight, when she came and stood in my doorway the way she always did and said, "I'm not interrupting, I'm delivering." And I said, "Marry me for real this time, on purpose, on an ordinary Tuesday, for no reason except you want to." It was a Tuesday. She said she'd been waiting for me to figure that out. When people ask how we got together, June tells them, "I introduced him to my parents as my fiancé, and we'd never even held hands." And then I add, "And then that night we finally did, and I never let go." Both are true. Neither is the whole truth. The whole truth is that I spent 33 years being steady because I was afraid that if I ever asked someone to choose me, they wouldn't. So I made myself easy to overlook, useful as a porch step. And June spent her whole life being told she was too much, so she lied her way into being loved because she didn't believe she could just be loved. It took a fake engagement to teach us we'd had the real thing the whole time. We just hadn't been brave enough to look at it in daylight, where nobody set us up, where nobody was watching, where the only person we had to convince was each other. Sometimes the truest thing in the building is the thing you've been calling just rent. Sometimes you have to tell one impossible lie to finally say the simple thing out loud. And sometimes the person you've been waiting for is already standing in your doorway with 2 mugs, telling you they're not interrupting, they're delivering, and the only thing left to do is finally reach out and take their hand. So tell me, what would you have done if your roommate suddenly introduced you to her parents as her fiancé and you'd never even held hands? Would you have gone along with it or told the truth in the kitchen? And have you ever realized, far too late, that the person you'd been calling just a friend was the one you'd been quietly in love with the whole time? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.